Jonathan Reed had everything that most people could only dream of. His face appeared on business magazines, his name carried weight in the corporate world, and his wealth was so vast that people often whispered about it with both admiration and envy. Yet despite all of his success, Jonathan often felt strangely empty inside. He had grown used to luxury, private jets, expensive dinners, and people always treating him differently because of who he was. What he missed, more than anything, was the simplicity of ordinary life, the kind of life he had before he became a billionaire. One cold evening, while returning from a business meeting in a small town, Jonathan decided to take a detour. His driver offered to take him back to his mansion, but Jonathan insisted on stopping at a local diner he spotted along the road. The neon sign flickered faintly, and the place looked modest, almost forgotten compared to the glamorous restaurants he usually dined in. Something about the diner's humble glow pulled him in. He asked the driver to wait outside and walked in quietly, dressed simply in jeans and a jacket so that no one would recognize him. The diner smelled of freshly brewed coffee and warm pancakes. The sound of plates clinking and light chatter filled the air. Jonathan sat at a corner booth near the window, wanting to observe without being noticed. Unlike the high-class restaurants where everything felt stiff and formal, this place felt alive, real, and comforting, the kind of place where people came not just to eat but to feel at home. His attention was soon drawn to one of the waitresses. She was moving between tables with a warm but slightly tired smile. She looked young, perhaps in her 20s, and her uniform was neat but clearly worn from long hours of use. What caught Jonathan's eye most was the cast on her right arm. Despite having only one good hand, she balanced trays carefully, never allowing her struggle to show too much. She greeted each customer politely, even joking with a few regulars who seemed to adore her. Jonathan watched closely as she carried a tray of steaming coffee mugs. The tray tilted a little, and for a moment it seemed like she might drop it, but she quickly steadied it with her left hand and continued as if nothing had happened. He could see the effort in her eyes, but she carried herself with quiet determination. When she finally came to Jonathan's table, she gave the same polite smile she offered to everyone else. "Good evening, sir. What can I get you tonight?" she asked, her voice calm and gentle. Jonathan looked at her for a moment, slightly surprised by her composure. "Just a cup of coffee, black," he replied. "Of course," she said, writing it down with her left hand. "It'll be right out." As she walked away, Jonathan found himself wondering about her. Most people in her condition might have taken time off to heal, but here she was, pushing herself through the pain. There was no complaint in her expression, only quiet strength. When she returned with his coffee, Jonathan noticed how carefully she set it down with her left hand, steadying the saucer against the table so it wouldn't spill. "Here you go," she said softly. "Thank you," Jonathan replied, watching her closely. "If you don't mind me asking, how did you hurt your arm?" For a brief moment her smile faded, but she quickly replaced it with calmness. "Just a little accident," she said lightly. "Nothing I can't handle." She didn't say more and moved on to attend to another table before Jonathan could ask further. Jonathan sipped his coffee and continued observing her as she worked. He noticed how other customers seemed to know her well. An older couple asked about her health, and she reassured them with the same answer she had given him. A group of teenagers laughed when she teased them about ordering too many fries. Despite her injury, she carried the atmosphere of the diner on her shoulders, making it feel warm and welcoming. Jonathan's mind began to wander. Why was she still working when she clearly needed rest? Why didn't she take time off to heal? And what kind of life had shaped someone to carry themselves with so much quiet dignity in the face of struggle? He thought back to his own younger years. Before he became wealthy, he had worked long hours in small jobs, washing dishes, delivering newspapers, and even sweeping floors. He remembered how exhausting it was, how heavy each day felt when you knew bills were waiting at home. But unlike this young waitress, he had never faced such struggles with an injury. Something about her resilience made him feel a deep sense of respect and also curiosity. At one point, Jonathan saw her retreat behind the counter for a moment when she thought no one was looking. She gently rubbed her arm, her face tightening, briefly in pain. But as soon as another customer called for her, she straightened her posture, forced a smile, and went right back to work as though nothing was wrong. Jonathan realized she was carrying more than just trays of food. She was carrying a heavy burden inside, and yet she never let it spill out for the world to see. That kind of strength, he thought, was rare. The night grew quieter as customers slowly left. Jonathan remained seated, pretending to sip his coffee, even though it had grown cold. He simply wanted to watch, to understand more about this waitress who intrigued him so deeply. When she finally had a moment free, she walked past his table again, giving him a polite nod. Jonathan smiled back, but inside he was already making a decision. He wanted to know her story, not because he was a billionaire seeking entertainment, but because something about her told him that behind her broken arm and tired smile, there was a truth worth uncovering. For the first time in a long while, Jonathan felt something stir inside him: curiosity, empathy, and a sense of connection. And though he had entered the diner just to escape his own world for a while, he had no idea that this simple visit was about to change his life and hers in ways he could never have imagined. Jonathan returned to the diner the following evening. He told himself it was just for the food, but deep down he knew that wasn't true. He was curious about the waitress with the broken arm, the one who carried herself with quiet strength despite her struggle. He wanted to understand her life, though he still kept his true identity hidden. When he walked in, the diner was busier than the night before. Families sat in booths, children laughed over milkshakes, and the smell of fried chicken and fresh biscuits filled the air. Jonathan slipped back into the same booth near the window, hoping to observe again without drawing attention. Soon enough, she appeared. Maya, that was her name. He heard another customer call her that, was working harder than ever. Her left arm carried trays piled with plates, while her right arm, bound in a cast, hung close to her side. Jonathan could see the strain in her movements. She smiled at customers, but he noticed how she sometimes pressed her lips together when she thought no one was watching, as if trying to hide the pain. She came to his table, recognizing him from the night before. "Back again?" she asked with a small smile. "Yeah," Jonathan said. "The coffee was good." "Glad to hear it," Maya replied, jotting down his order with her left hand. "Same thing tonight?" "Yes, please," Jonathan answered, as she walked away. Jonathan overheard snippets of conversations from other tables. People seemed to know her well, and almost everyone asked about her arm. Each time, Maya responded lightly, never giving details. "I'm fine," she said. Or, "It's healing." She brushed it off as though it didn't matter, but Jonathan could see it did matter. He noticed how her hand trembled slightly when she set down heavy plates. He saw the way she shifted her weight to keep balance when carrying trays. And yet, she never once asked anyone for help. Later in the evening, a group of rowdy teenagers entered the diner, ordering more food than they could probably pay for. Maya served them without irritation, even laughing at their silly jokes. When one of them accidentally spilled a drink, she hurried over, cleaned it up with one hand, and assured them it was no problem. Her patience surprised Jonathan. In his world, people often grew frustrated over the smallest inconveniences, yet here she was, handling much more with calm and grace. At one point, an older woman sitting at the counter called out, "Maya, are you sure you should be working with that arm?" Maya's smile stayed steady, though Jonathan caught a flicker of sadness in her eyes. "I'll be okay, Mrs. Green," she replied. "Bills don't pay themselves, right?" The woman gave her a look of sympathy but didn't press further. Jonathan leaned back in his seat, thinking about those words. Bills don't pay themselves. He realized then that Maya wasn't just working through pain out of stubbornness. She was working because she had no choice. When Maya finally returned with Jonathan's order, he looked at her closely. "You must be very strong," he said quietly. She looked surprised. "Strong? Why do you say that?" "Because most people wouldn't be here working with a broken arm," he explained. Maya gave a small laugh, though there wasn't much humor in it. "Maybe, But strength doesn't really matter when your family needs food on the table. You just do what you have to do. Jonathan wanted to ask more, but she was called away by another customer. He sat there staring at his coffee, her words echoing in his mind. Family, food on the table. Do what you have to do. He knew there was more to her story, something deeper that she wasn't saying. As the night went on, Jonathan saw her nearly drop a tray of plates. The cast made it difficult to grip properly, but instead of giving up, she shifted her body and steadied it with her hip, carrying it to the table with practiced skill. Customers hardly noticed, but Jonathan did. He realized she must have been doing this for days, maybe weeks, adapting every movement just to keep working. The diner started to clear out later in the night. Jonathan lingered again, pretending to drink slowly. From his booth, he could see her wiping down tables, moving a little slower now, her energy fading. She glanced toward the clock, and for the first time, her smile slipped completely. Her shoulders sagged, and she rubbed her injured arm gently, almost as though whispering an apology to it for overworking. Jonathan's chest tightened. He felt a mixture of respect and sadness. Respect because she carried herself with so much dignity despite her hardship. Sadness because he knew no one should have to suffer like this just to survive. When she brought him his check, Jonathan gave her a warm smile. "You're very dedicated," he said softly. She shrugged lightly. "Like I said, you just do what you have to do." Jonathan paid in cash and left a generous tip, though he kept it modest enough so she wouldn't suspect who he really was. Then he walked out into the night, his thoughts heavy. As his driver opened the car door, Jonathan hesitated. He turned back to look at the diner one more time. Through the window, he saw Maya laughing with another waitress, though he could tell her laugh was forced, her body still tired. In that moment, Jonathan realized something. He had spent years surrounded by wealth, luxury, and power, yet he had rarely seen the kind of strength that Maya showed. She wasn't rich, she wasn't famous, but she had a courage that outshone all the success he had known. The ride back to his mansion felt unusually long. Jonathan sat in silence, replaying the evening in his mind. Maya's face, her words, her quiet determination. They all stayed with him. He wondered about her family, about the bills she mentioned, about what kind of life she was living outside the diner's walls. For the first time in years, Jonathan felt restless. He wanted to know more. He wanted to understand her world, the kind of struggles that force someone to work through pain with a smile on their face. He wanted to see beyond the surface. Little did he know, this curiosity would soon lead him to discover truths that would not only shock him, but also change the way he viewed his own life. Jonathan could not stop thinking about Maya after his second visit to the diner. Her words kept echoing in his head. You just do what you have to do. He had heard countless motivational speeches in boardrooms, had read books written by powerful people, and had attended endless charity galas where people spoke about resilience and strength. Yet none of those polished words had the same weight as the simple sentence spoken by a tired waitress with a broken arm. By the third evening, Jonathan found himself once again pulling up outside the diner. His driver looked surprised but didn't question it. Jonathan entered quietly, the bell above the door chiming as he stepped inside. This time the diner was less crowded. The air felt calmer, and the sound of soft music played faintly from an old jukebox in the corner. Maya was there again, moving from table to table with her familiar smile. The cast on her arm looked the same, though Jonathan noticed the way she cradled it occasionally when she thought no one was looking. Her steps seemed heavier than before, and he could tell exhaustion was starting to catch up with her. Jonathan slid into his usual booth. When Maya came over, her face lit up in recognition. "You're becoming a regular," she teased lightly. "Guess I am," Jonathan replied, smiling. "There's something about this place." "It's the coffee," she said, jotting down his order. "People say it's the best in town." But Jonathan knew it wasn't just the coffee. It was her presence. The way she carried herself, the way she worked tirelessly despite her struggles. She was the reason he kept coming back. As she walked away, Jonathan's curiosity deepened. He wanted to know the truth about her life, Why was she pushing herself so hard? What story was hiding behind that brave smile? He decided to ask the diner's manager. When Maya disappeared into the kitchen, Jonathan waved over the man behind the counter, a middle-aged man named Carl. "She works hard," Jonathan said casually, nodding toward Maya. Carl looked at her fondly. "Harder than anyone I've seen," he replied. "That girl never complains. Even with that arm, she's been showing up every single day." "Why doesn't she take some time off to rest?" Jonathan asked carefully. Carl sighed. "Because she can't afford to. Maya's got younger siblings at home. Their mother passed away a few years ago, and their father's been out of the picture for a long time. She's the one holding that family together. Rent, food, school supplies, you name it, she pays for it. She even picked up a second job before the accident. That's how she ended up breaking her arm. Fell during a late-night shift at the warehouse. Doctor told her to take weeks off, but she was back here the next day. Said her family couldn't wait." Jonathan listened in silence, each word weighing heavily on him. He looked back at Maya, who was serving coffee with the same bright smile, and felt his chest tighten. She was just one person, yet she carried the weight of an entire family. No one in his wealthy circle could ever imagine that kind of responsibility. "Does anyone help her?" Jonathan asked quietly. Carl shook his head. "A few neighbors pitch, and when they can, but Maya doesn't like asking for help. She's too proud. She'll break herself before she lets anyone pity her." Jonathan nodded slowly, his thoughts racing. He sipped his coffee, hardly tasting it. He couldn't stop thinking about what Carl had said. Maya wasn't just working through an injury, she was fighting to keep her family alive. When she came back to his table, Jonathan studied her face more closely. He noticed the faint shadows under her eyes, the way her smile wavered for just a second before settling back into place. "You must love your family a lot," he said softly. Maya looked at him in surprise. "Of course I do," she replied. Her eyes softened. "They're everything to me." Jonathan wanted to ask more, but she was called away again. This time he noticed how quickly she moved when a family with young children entered. She greeted them warmly, making the kids laugh with little jokes as she set down their menus. She treated every customer as though they mattered, no matter how tired she was. Jonathan leaned back in his seat, his mind full of thoughts. He had met thousands of people in his life, politicians, CEOs, celebrities, but none of them had impressed him the way this young woman did. She had no wealth, no fame, and no power, yet she possessed something far greater. A heart strong enough to carry others even when she was struggling herself. As the night went on, Jonathan stayed longer than usual. He watched carefully, taking in every small detail. He noticed how Maya always made sure the older customers had everything they needed. He noticed how she gave extra fries to the kids when their parents weren't looking. He noticed how she checked her watch several times, probably thinking about her siblings at home waiting for her. When the diner grew quiet near closing time, Jonathan finally stood up to leave. But before he walked out, he paused near the counter where Carl stood. He pulled out his wallet and handed Carl a card. "If Maya ever needs anything," he said softly, "tell her to call this number." Carl looked at the card, his eyebrows raising slightly. He didn't recognize Jonathan, but something about the way he spoke made him nod respectfully. "I'll remember that," he said. Jonathan left the diner that night with a heavy heart. On the drive home, he stared out the window at the passing lights, thinking about Maya and her siblings. He remembered his own childhood, the struggles his family faced before his success. But even then, he had never shouldered a burden like hers. By the time he reached his mansion, Jonathan had already made up his mind. He couldn't just sit back and watch. He couldn't walk away knowing what she was going through. He had the power to help, and for the first time in a long time, he felt that using his wealth for something truly meaningful was exactly what he needed to do. That night, Jonathan barely slept. He kept picturing Maya, working with one arm, smiling through her pain, carrying plates while carrying her family's future on her shoulders. He felt both admiration and guilt. Admiration for her courage, guilt for all the times he had wasted his fortune on meaningless luxuries while people like her fought just to survive. He promised himself that the next time he walked into that diner, he wouldn't just be an observer. He would be a quiet force of change in Maya's life. And though she might never ask for it, he knew in his heart she deserved it. Jonathan woke up the next morning with a strange feeling in his heart. It had been years since he had felt this kind of urgency. Normally, his days started with long meetings, endless calls, and discussions about investments. But today, his thoughts were not on business, not on profits, not on numbers. His mind was entirely on Maya, the young waitress who carried burdens far heavier than any stock market curve. As he sat at breakfast, he barely touched his food. His assistants went over schedules, but he wasn't listening. For once, he allowed himself to push aside the world of luxury and focus on something far more important, helping someone who truly needed it. By evening, Jonathan returned to the diner once again. The moment he stepped inside, the warm smell of food and the soft chatter of people wrapped around him like a blanket. Maya was there, as he expected, moving from table to table, carrying plates with her left hand while her casted arm rested stiffly against her side. He wondered how much pain she was hiding tonight. When she came to his table, she gave him that familiar, gentle smile. "Back again," she said softly. Jonathan nodded. "I think I've found my favorite place." She chuckled lightly and took his order, but Jonathan noticed that her movements were slower, her steps heavier. It was clear the long hours were wearing her down. As she walked away, Jonathan's eyes followed her. He thought about everything Carl had told him the night before, her siblings, her responsibilities, the accident. His heart ached, but it also strengthened his decision. He would help her, but not in a way that made her feel pitied. He wanted her to feel respected, supported, and uplifted. The first thing he did was take care of her medical bills. Without telling her, he contacted the local hospital and cleared everything in her name. He knew it would take a heavy weight off her shoulders. Then, through one of his trusted foundations, he arranged a scholarship fund for her younger siblings. He made sure the paperwork was done quietly, so it would appear as though the opportunity had come from a community program, not from him directly. But he wasn't done. Jonathan also spoke privately to Carl, the diner manager. He slipped him an envelope filled with money and said, "Make sure Maya doesn't lose hours, but adjust her shifts so she doesn't strain her arm too much. And use this to improve the diner if needed." Carl looked at him in surprise. "Why are you doing this?" Jonathan smiled faintly. "Because people like Maya are the reason kindness still exists in the world. She deserves a chance to breathe." Carl nodded slowly, his respect for the quiet stranger deepening. He promised to do exactly as asked. That night, Jonathan sat in the diner longer than usual, quietly observing how Maya worked. He noticed the way her eyes softened whenever she thought about her family, the way she always put others before herself. She still had no idea that her life was about to change. When the diner grew quiet near closing time, Jonathan finally stood up to leave. Maya came over with his check, looking a little more tired than before. "You always stay late," she said. With a small smile, Jonathan returned the smile. "I guess I enjoy the peace here." "Well, I'm glad," she said. "Most people don't notice the little things about this place." "Oh, I think the little things are the most important," Jonathan replied gently. She tilted her head, slightly as if wondering about his words, but she didn't ask more. Instead, she thanked him and moved on to clean another table. As Jonathan walked out into the night, his heart felt lighter. He had taken the first steps toward helping her, but he knew it wasn't enough. He wanted to do more, not to overwhelm her, but to ensure she never had to carry such heavy burdens alone again. Over the next week, Jonathan continued to quietly help. He made sure groceries were delivered anonymously to her doorstep. He arranged small but meaningful opportunities for her siblings, such as school supplies and after-school programs, all through local organizations, so she would never suspect it came from him. Every detail was carefully planned so that Maya would feel blessed, not pitied. Each evening, Jonathan returned to the diner, watching her from his usual booth. Maya still worked tirelessly, but little by little, Jonathan noticed small changes. She seemed less anxious, as though some hidden pressure was easing. She smiled more freely, laughed more easily, and though she still rubbed her arm when no one looked, there was less of that heavy sadness in her eyes. One evening, as Jonathan sat sipping his coffee, Maya approached his table and looked at him, curiously. "You always come here and just order coffee," she said with a playful grin. "You know we have food, right?" Jonathan chuckled softly. "I'll try the food one day." "You should," she said. "It's not fancy, but it's made with love." Her words struck him. Not fancy, but made with love. That was exactly what defined her life, wasn't it? Not fancy, not easy, but full of love and sacrifice. As the days passed, Jonathan's admiration for her grew. He no longer saw her only as a waitress with a broken arm. He saw her as a symbol of strength, someone who fought through hardship with courage and grace. One night, as he watched her, Jonathan realized something. He had spent so much of his life surrounded by wealth, yet none of it had given him the same peace he felt sitting in that small diner, watching someone like Maya. She reminded him of the values he had forgotten, of the power of resilience, of the beauty of simple kindness. He didn't reveal his identity yet. He wanted her to know him not as a billionaire, but as a man who respected her strength. He wanted her to see that even strangers could care. And so, night after night, he continued his quiet intervention, clearing her path little by little, easing her struggles without ever demanding recognition. Jonathan knew the day would come when she discovered the truth. But for now, he was content to simply be her silent supporter, the unseen hand that made her journey a little easier. And, though she didn't know it, her courage was already changing him in ways he hadn't expected. Weeks passed, and Jonathan kept up his quiet support. Every evening he would return to the diner, sitting in his usual booth by the window. Maya grew used to his presence, often greeting him with a warm smile and small conversations that made the nights feel lighter. She didn't know that behind the stranger who only ordered coffee was a man who had been silently changing her life piece by piece. Her bills had been paid, her siblings had new school supplies, and groceries had started, arriving at her doorstep. At first, she thought it was some kind of mistake, but when the deliveries kept coming with no names attached, she told herself it must have been some charity program she hadn't heard of. She felt grateful, but also puzzled. Jonathan, meanwhile, felt something inside him shift. For years, he had lived in a world of numbers, contracts, and luxury, but it all felt so small compared to the joy he now felt in doing something meaningful for one person and her family. Watching Maya's burden slowly lift, even just a little, filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't known in a long time. One evening, Jonathan noticed that Maya's arm had healed enough for her to finally remove the cast. She was still, careful with it, but her movements were lighter, her steps quicker. Her laughter rang through the diner more freely, and her eyes no longer carried the same shadow of exhaustion he had seen before. Jonathan felt proud, almost as if he had been a part of her recovery, though she didn't know his role in it. But he also knew he couldn't remain hidden forever. He had promised himself that one day he would reveal the truth. And now, as her life seemed to be slowly finding balance again, he felt the moment was near. That night, he stayed later than usual. When the last customers left and the diner grew quiet, Maya walked over to his booth. She smiled, setting down his check. "You really do love this coffee, don't you?" she teased. Jonathan looked at her for a moment, then took a deep breath. "Maya," he said softly, "can I tell you something important?" Her smile faltered slightly at his serious tone. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. "Of course," she said. "What's on your mind?" Jonathan hesitated, then spoke gently. "I haven't been completely honest with you. I didn't just come here for the coffee, I came here because of you." Her eyes widened slightly, confusion flickering in them. "Because of me?" "Yes," Jonathan said. The first night I saw you, working with a broken arm, still smiling, still serving everyone with kindness, I was amazed. Most people in your position would have given up, but you didn't. I wanted to understand your strength. Maya shifted uncomfortably. I don't know about strength, she said quietly. I just do what I have to do. Jonathan nodded. Carl told me about your family, about how you've been raising your siblings alone, about how you sacrificed everything for them. Her face stiffened and she looked down. He shouldn't have told you that, she whispered. I know, Jonathan said gently, but I'm glad he did, because it showed me the truth about who you are. You're someone extraordinary, Maya. She looked at him then, her eyes shining with both surprise and suspicion. Why are you telling me this? You're just a customer. Why do you care? Jonathan took a deep breath. This was the moment he had been preparing for. Because I'm not just a customer. My name is Jonathan Reed. She blinked, the name not registering at first. Then her eyes widened as recognition dawned. Wait, you mean the billionaire? The businessman they talk about on the news? Jonathan nodded slowly. Yes, that's me. Maya stared at him in silence, her mind racing. For weeks she had served this quiet man coffee, never suspecting he was one of the wealthiest people in the country. She shook her head in disbelief. Why would someone like you come here? Why would you care about someone like me? Because you reminded me of something I had forgotten, Jonathan said earnestly. You reminded me what real strength looks like. You reminded me that wealth means nothing if it isn't used to make life better for others. Maya, you've done more with your broken arm and tired smile than I've done with all my millions. That's why I wanted to help you. Her eyes widened further. Help me? What do you mean? Jonathan smiled gently. The hospital bills, the groceries, the scholarships for your siblings. That was me. Maya's hand flew to her mouth. She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. That was you? She whispered. All this time, it was you? Jonathan nodded. I didn't want to embarrass you, so I kept it anonymous. But I couldn't watch you struggle alone when I had the means to help. For a long moment, Maya just sat there, silent tears streaming down her face. She had spent years carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. And now, to learn that someone had quietly lifted some of that weight, it was overwhelming. Finally, she whispered, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Jonathan replied softly. Just promise me you'll never stop being who you are. Your strength, your kindness. It's rare, Maya, and it's more powerful than any fortune. Maya wiped her tears, still, staring at him in awe. You don't understand. You've changed everything. My siblings, they'll have a chance now. I don't have to carry it all alone anymore. Jonathan reached across the table, placing his hand gently over hers. You never should have had to carry it alone, and now you don't have to. The diner was quiet, the soft hum of the jukebox filling the silence between them. Maya took a deep breath, her tears slowly turning into a shaky smile. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for seeing me. Not just as a waitress, but as a person. Jonathan smiled warmly. Maya, you're not just a person, you're an inspiration. From that night on, their bond grew stronger. Jonathan continued to support her family, not out of charity, but out of genuine respect and admiration. And Maya, for the first time in years, allowed herself to dream again. Dreams of studying, of building a better future not just for her, siblings, but for herself as well. Jonathan realized something too. True wealth wasn't measured by the size of his bank account, but by the lives he could touch with kindness. And in Maya, he had found a reminder of what truly mattered in life: love, resilience, and compassion. The story that began with a billionaire slipping into a small diner for coffee ended with two very different worlds colliding. Not through money, but through humanity. And for both Jonathan and Maya, that night marked the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, gratitude, and the knowledge that sometimes the simplest encounters can change lives forever.